Okay, so we've talked about how the pathogens get in, how the pathogens get out, and how they spread from host to host. The next just 4 slides are talking about how it spreads through the body, and this is going to be very general because this is very pathogen specific. Okay, so some of the components that make the spread in the body specific to each pathogen is, for instance, nutrient requirements. What does the pathogen need to survive? And, for instance, the protozoa that causes malaria needs the iron in the red blood cells. Okay, so it's going to be very specific to where it spreads in the body based on its nutrient requirements. For viruses, we talk about tissue specificity due to receptors. So this is especially for viruses, but bacteria also have tissue specificity. Protozoa have places they like to grow. But remember, viruses are obligate intracellular parasites, and so they have to get into a specific cell type that has the receptor that allows it to infect. Temperature can restrict where the virus spreads. So your, say, nasal system, nose, is about 33 degrees compared to the internal body, which is 37. The nasal flu mist, the nasal vaccine, has a temperature-sensitive virus that is alive, attenuated, so it's a weak virus, and it can only replicate in that cooler temperature. So if you snort in your flu mist and it gets into your respiratory tract, that's too warm. It's temperature sensitive and it can't replicate there. So there are some pathogens that need cooler spaces versus warmer spaces. This is something when you get into your group presentations that you will talk about how these viruses spread in the body, what organs they infect. As you can see, different organs and tissues there. Is it a more surface infection? Or is it something that goes systemic? So systemic we're talking more about in the blood and the lymph. Okay, so can it go all over the place and replicate? And one of the big factors about how it spreads in the body is your immune response. So we've talked a lot about opportunistic infections that would not normally be pathogens, but when they get in the wrong place at the wrong time, they can replicate, and especially when you have a weakened immune response. Pretty much the way something is transmitted tells you about where it's going to spread in the body, right? Because it wants to go to the body parts where it can replicate, make more, and then get out. So this next slide is really just reminding you about some of the ways pathogens can spread in the body systemically, okay? And we're talking about the blood and the lymph. And I think about the lymph as a lot of other fluids. Probably have heard of like lymph nodes. So if you get sick, sometimes you have little bulges under your armpit that are lymph nodes that are swollen. So this is another big type of bodily fluid. And remember that you've got immune system molecules and cells flowing through both the blood and the lymph. But this is a way something can spread to other organs, to distant places in the body. Some pathogens are what we call neuro, oh. Why am I not spelling neuro right? Neurotropic. Which means they like the nerve system, the brain, the cerebral spinal fluid. And that's where they're going to go and replicate. So some examples, since they don't have examples here, tetanus toxin. These are things that infect the nervous tissue, rabies, herpes, varicella zoster, the one that causes chickenpox, as well as shingles, and polio. Polio primarily replicates in your gut, but if it gets access to nerve cells, it can also replicate in the nerve cells. And since it exits by lysis, it destroys the nerve cells, and that's how you get paralytic poliomyelitis. Cerebral spinal fluid, there are things called echovirus and mumps and Neisseria, meningitis. I think I spelled that right. I don't know. You can. Haemophilus influenza. Gosh, I just really cannot spell it. I should just have this all programmed and hit buttons. I don't want you. Oh, I'm hitting something. I don't even know where to put my hand. Haemophilus influenza, which is not the flu, but it's actually a bacteria we now have a vaccine for. Strep, pneumonia, other kinds of pathogens that travel, in the cerebral spinal fluid. There's encephalitis type viruses that head up to the brain. So, again, you don't need to know any specific pathogens. I just think it's kind of interesting that they all have their niche in the host that they like to go to and replicate. Factors that are going to affect the spread. So when I'm talking about spread, again, I'm talking about them moving throughout the body and replicating, making more pathogens. A couple key components are what the microbes produce. So we talked a little bit about virulence factors, okay, things that make it more pathogenic. Some bacteria will produce toxins that help them destroy cells and go into deeper tissues. Maybe they express pili that help them stick somewhere. So the virulence factors, what the microbes produce, can determine how they spread. Your host immune response. Right? If you have a really strong host immune response, say you have been vaccinated to something before and this is your second challenge, you may not ever get disease. You may not get sick, hopefully not. That's why we do vaccines, because your host immune response is already primed and ready to take over. But sometimes it gets overactive. and causes what we call immunopathology, which is basically tissue damage due to our immune system. And as we've talked about, if it's weakened, you increase the likelihood of infection. Okay. Your genetics. Okay. Do you produce the receptors for the virus? So do you produce something that naturally protects you against certain pathogens? There's really cool research into kind of the evolution of human genetics and diseases, and how some groups are more resistant to certain diseases than others, and it's all based on their genetics. And finally, the microbial genetics. And here I'm really talking about mutations. So has the microbe changed so that maybe your immune response can't recognize it as well, or maybe it's producing something more virulent or giving it some kind of advantage? So these are different depending on the pathogen and depending on the host. So that's the end of spread in the body. Where we're going next is we're going to talk next week about the immune response. Make sure you look over the homework that is due, that's on Canvas, and talk to you again next week.